Hi guys, welcome back to our channel Binge or Bust. Today we are going to review a book series called the Hidden Hindu Trilogy. It has 3 books in it, and this book had hit the Indian book market like a storm. It raised so many curious interests by everybody, and it topped all the best-selling charts in our country. In the Amazon, in the category of the fiction, this book was topping the list whenever the new edition was released and throughout the year. But is this book really that good, or was it just overhyped? Come, let's dive into this and let's find it out. So what happens when ancient Hindu gods collide with the fast-paced modern India? We get the series Hidden Hindu, written by the author Akshat Gupta. This series is touted to be a perfect blend of mystery, fiction, science and mythology. Let's dive into the first book of the series called Hidden Hindu Part 1. This book starts where we meet a young man named Prithvi who is in search for Om Shastri, an enigmatic aghori who holds the secrets that could rewrite the history of the country, nay, the world. Gupta dives headfirst into the action, weaving a familiar tapestry of legends and gods with the fabric of modern India. The pacing of this book is what works in its favor. The book packs a bag of punches, tricks and twists at the readers, and the pace never drops. The story is highly engaging even though it's fast-paced. The characters are a little stereotypical, but they're surprisingly well written in connection to the story. The characters keep you guessing about their true intentions throughout every twist and trick in the book. This book, all in all, does what a first book in a series ought to do. It sets up the stage for the series' overall theme and the characters and the story, and it keeps the readers guessing about the next parts and very impatiently waiting for it. This book talks about the concept of Chiranjeevis and the eternal struggle for the good versus evil. Now, the story goes back and forth from the point of view of Prithvi, who is searching for Om Shastri, and the point of view of the third person, where Om Shastri is captured by the Indian military and locked in the Andaman. Only later for us to find out it was not Indian military who captured him. There is a separate force and entity behind the curtains who is pulling the strings to and hell-bent on capturing Om Shastri. But for what? We don't know yet. And the Om Shastri's truths, once they begin to reveal layer by layer, everybody in the book is shocked. When he says he was alive during the time of Ramayana, he was the Chanakya and he was the Singh leader. So you don't know whom to believe. It all seems too much far-fetched even for a mythical fantasy book. And the story throws so many punches at you that you keep doubting yourself whether this is actually believable in a mythical fantasy or Om Shastri is bluffing and the author is covering it up in a clever way. And this is a very neat trick used by the author to keep the readers hooked, whether you like it or not, because you still stay there to find out what's going to happen in the end. And we are introduced to so many characters and they are surprisingly well developed, but it was a little disappointing to see few likable characters killed in the end, but it was still in line with the story, so it was not too illogical. And in the end we are introduced to 2 more assailants who call themselves Chiranjeevis, who come in for the rescue of Om Shastri from that unknown person who wants the Om Shastri captured. So the burning questions are, why does Om Shastri have to be captured by that person? Who is that person? And who are these 2 assailants who come and help Om Shastri? What are their real identities? Are Chiranjeevis really existing? Is it really happening? Is this the story focal point? And this is what keeps the readers interested and looking forward to reading the second and third book. I must say this was a very clever writing by the author, because he had revealed only the main plot points and didn't reveal the details or any other things about the book. So the reader is still interested and still waiting for the other book to come. So let's see into the second book and see if that burning question is answered or not. Where the first book was all about setting up characters and the series' overall themes, the second book concentrates more on establishing the conflict point of the series and the backstories of the important characters involved in the story. In the first book we were thrown so many twists and turns that in the second book we need those twists and turns explained and the motivations behind the characters explained for us to keep interested in the series and the story to keep moving. In the second book, we are introduced to the 7 Chiranjeevis and we are told how a deity has become a Chiranjeevi and the key role of a Chiranjeevi in maintaining the universe balance between Dharma and Adharma and good and evil. Pacing of this second book is a little bit slow compared to the first one, and that is expected because in the first book we were just introduced to the plot points and many twists were just thrown at us without the character's true intentions revealed at most of the time. But in the second book, the author has done a good job of explaining the motivations behind the characters and setting up the backstories and expanding neatly and slowly more on the conflicts that are present in this book. We are introduced to the mystic place of Shambhala and the mystical creatures living in Shambhala like unicorns, anything you ever imagined to be in a mythical fantasy book, you can find it there. In this book, we follow the journey of antagonist. Nagendra wants to achieve immortality by taking the blood of Om Shastri. We are not revealed as to why Nagendra's intention is to become immortal, but nevertheless that seems to be his goal. And to achieve that, he finds out an alternate way where he doesn't need Om Shastri's blood yet. So he sets out on accomplishing a series of tasks to become immortal. And his first stop is in Himalayas. In this journey to the Himalayas, he has with him his 2 loyal disciples, LSD and Parimal. But now the dynamic equation between these 3 characters is very awkward, and these 2 characters, Parimal and LSD, don't seem to share any warmth towards Nagendra. So there doesn't seems any logical explanation for why these 2 characters are loyal to Nagendra. Even though at times we find out that Parimal is utterly terrified and is not entirely convinced of Nagendra's ways of doing certain things, but he still persists, he still stays loyal to him. And we don't know why LSD is also scared of Nagendra, and they don't share even an iota of warmth between them. On the protagonist side, we are introduced to more Chiranjeevis. We are introduced to Parashurama, we are introduced to Ashwatthama, and we are introduced to Om Shastri's backstory. And the backstory is so marvelous that even though it clears most of our initial questions, it raises new doubts and new confusion in our minds as to who actually is this Om Shastri and why is he immortal. That's a question we have still not been answered in the second book. We know why Ashwatthama is immortal, why Hanuman is immortal, why Vidura is immortal. But who is this Om Shastri? Why is he immortal? That is a burning question that we don't have the answer yet. Meanwhile, the story picks up the pace and it keeps on having mini battles at different places with interesting points in it to keep the readers hooked. But for the most part, the book seemed a little inconsistent with its pacing because it went too slow and too repetitive at times, trying to explain the backstories of characters and their conflict points, and it kept on dragging to a point in the book where I got bored. But as soon as the battle scenes and fighting scenes starts, it picked up the pace and became very interesting again. So the book was a little erratic and inconsistent in its pacing, but all in all it was a decent read, the starting that the book one provided. As the second book ends, we are revealed that Om had regained all his lost memory and he has regained all his powers, knowledge, and is all powerful and mighty again. And whereas Nagendra also seems to be gaining new power and seems to be hell-bent on conquering Om Shastri. Now, the burning question throughout the whole book was, who is Om Shastri? Who is Nagendra? Why Nagendra wants a blood of Om Shastri? And what all the Chiranjeevis are trying to protect in the second book? And where does Kalki figure out in all this grand scheme of things? So in third book, we are answered to the burning question of who is Om and who is Nagendra. And we also get to know who is LSD and who is Parimal. The reveal about Om Shastri and Nagendra and other characters in this book is very cleverly done by the author. So much so that you will be shocked and you will be surprised and you would have never guessed as to the actual reason or actual point behind the burning question of who is Om and who is Nagendra. And after this reveal, the story picks up even more pace. It starts with the sides being divided into the good and bad and everybody trying to recruit more forces into their army. So we are introduced to Patal Lok, Bhulok and Akash Lok. So we are introduced to the new characters of Vibhishana, Mahabali and rest of the Chiranjeevis in the book, and they are forced to choose a side between the good and evil. And we have the almighty Shukracharya helping Nagendra, LSD and Parimal and their army of bandits. We are also introduced to our famous characters in the Ramayana like Ravana, Kumbhakarna and Bakasura, who are recruited by the bad side in the book. And all the forces of good and bad clash, and everybody has their own agenda and their own belief, and everybody is fighting for their own belief system. So who will win in this epic showdown, good or bad, dharma or adharma? You have to read this book to find out that ultimate answer. And also, before we finish off this review, if you guys remember me talking about the first book, we first embarked on this journey with Prithvi, a young man who was searching for Om Shastri. And the first book narrative was going back and forth between Prithvi's narrative and the Om Shastri's capture in the Andaman Islands. But in the second book, that pacing and that kind of storytelling was erratic and dropped a little bit, and we didn't find out much about Prithvi or Dr. Batra in that book. So in the third book, we are again more familiarized with the Dr. Batra and why Prithvi is searching for Om Shastri in the first place, and how come Prithvi, who is only 21 years old, knows about all the incidents that has happened before he was even born and knows it very intimately. So this is one conflict point that author could have actually utilized a lot in his first and second book, but he has dropped the ball in utilizing this plot point a lot. But nevertheless, the Prithvi storyline and why and how Mrs. Batra, a seemingly not so important character in the series, becomes a very important pawn in this chess game of good versus evil. And we are also introduced to who is Prithvi at the end of the book, which is very shocking to say the least. So all in all, this third book finishes the series off very well, and everything comes a full circle, and the author has tied all the loose ends that he has and all the plot points he has opened in all his books. So, and some plot points he closed very urgently without much explanation, and some plot points he has closed very satisfyingly for the readers who are following this series from the first book. But the trilogy is not without its problems. It's not perfect, but it's sometimes very inconsistent in storytelling, and some characters it picks up and elevates in a good way, but then drops them for another character and another story. Likewise, the author could have done more on developing a storyline of Prithvi and Dr. Batra and Mrs. Batra. That could have been very interesting way to unfold the story that was happening in this good versus evil battle. But even though it was an interesting plot point, the author had developed the character so well but had left it in between and again jumped onto the other plot point. And there were some characters which were not introduced until the second book, but suddenly they were holding a lot of importance in the third book, which would make a reader uncomfortable a little bit and unfamiliar because they were not familiar with that character in the first two books. But this book still is a very good read for a person who has no or little to no knowledge about the mythology of India and the many stories of Indian folk tales. But if you are like me, who grew up listening to grandma's tales and reading lot of mythological books, then you already know 40% of the backstories of Chiranjeevis and the folk tales that he is talking about. So even though you already know the actual truth behind the characters, but still it holds a very good intrigue because the actual plot point of the whole characters, the good versus evil, is still very original and a good thought by the author. This is a very good gateway for a reader who's starting out on the mythological fiction and doesn't know where to start. So, if you're interested in mythology and if you're interested in Indian mythology and you're starting out now, then please pick up this first book, and I tell you, you will not regret reading this book. If you like this book and you want to explore further interesting reads in the same genre and which are enjoyable and keep the readers hooked until the end like this, then I have good recommendation list for you. There is Shatrujit Nath's Guardians of Hala Hala, which is a series of 3 to 4 books and is a very interesting read. And we have Ashwin Sanghi's Krishna Ki, which is also a very interesting blend of mythology and science in the modern India. And by the same author, we have The Vault of Vishnu, which involves Indian military and the science fiction that happened many centuries ago. So, this series is a binge for me. I am going to revisit it again and again whenever I want a pick me up or when I am feeling gloomy and want to read a mythological fiction which is also light and adventurous. So guys, this is a binge for me. Please let us know in the comments below if you have already read Hidden Hindu and whether it was worth it for you. Please like, share and subscribe to our channel, Binge or Bust.